So let's go ahead and start off by defining what the dihedral angle is, okay? The dihedral angle is defined by theta, okay? So theta is just a variable that means angle, okay? And what it does is it describes the rotation between the two largest groups relative to each other, okay? So basically the largest group in the front, on that front carbon, the largest group on the back carbon, where they are relative to each other, that's going to tell you your dihedral angle. So for example, if my two largest groups are overlapping each other perfectly like that, okay? By the way, I just want to point out that there is a mistake on mine, how it says CH3, it should be CH2 and then CH3, so don't let that freak you out, okay? So anyway, so if they're perfectly overlapping, that means that the difference in their angle is 0, because as you go further around, your angle gets bigger. But they're perfectly overlapping, so the dihedral angle in this case would be 0. And this conformation is called eclipsed. Okay? And the eclipsed conformation is the one where both of the groups overlap each other perfectly. Okay? This happens to be the conformation with the highest energy. Okay? Why would that be? Well, it turns out that large, bulky groups don't like to be next to each other. Why? Because they feel crowded. Remember that big, bulky groups, they don't just have atoms, they also have electrons. And electrons are negative. So if you put a bunch of these electrons together, they're going to repel each other. So it's a really bad idea for these groups to overlap each other so perfectly. So this is going to be highest energy, and what that means is lowest stability. Okay? Energy and stability are inverse of each other. Okay, they're opposites. Okay? So then let's look at the next one. The next one would be if the dihedral angle is 60 degrees. 60 degrees just means that they are not perfectly overlapping, but they're also not perfectly far away. They're just like kind of like, you know, maybe like at, I don't know, like 2 o'clock. Okay? And at a 60-degree angle, that is going to be called a weird word. That's going to be called gauche. Okay? And gauche is just, you can say it's when they're adjacent to each other. They're not overlapping, but they're still not as far away as possible. So in this case, you see how it's visualized there. Now, this one is not amazing, but it's not as bad as the other one. Okay? So what I'm trying to say here is that the gauche conformation, it's not as unstable as eclipsed, but it's also not as good as it could be. So I'm just going to say here it has like middle energy. Okay, and that's a terrible word to use. Okay, but middle meaning just that it's not as bad as eclipsed. So that would also mean kind of like middle stability. Okay, cool. So now we're going to go on to our last one. Our last one is, what if the dihedral angle is 180 degrees? That means that they're perfectly apart from each other, okay? If they're perfectly apart from each other, that means that they're the furthest away they can get, and that means this is going to be called anti, or anti, the anti-conformation. And the anti-conformation is where your two largest groups are opposite. That one's going to be the lowest energy. And by lowest energy, that would obviously mean most stable.